So this is part A of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel, world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. Anyone watching this for the first time should take this evidential factual disclaimer. Now look at this. All the items are about movies and films. All three items. That one is about Friends. That one, of course, about the tragic situation, about the killing of Helena Hutchins. And this one, of course, the item supposedly about bus drivers' strike. But all of these are about the world of movies and films, which actually confirms the evidence of the brainwashing of the many that goes on. The reality is not there. The reality is out of the media. And the brazenness of the mental slave, the racist slave, Trevor Terrible Phillips, is getting worse. This mental slave didn't invent the concept of woke. That was invented by the racists, his racist masters and his racist political masters and mistresses. But the shameless, brazen mental slave has no hesitation in jumping on the bandwagon of his masters and mistresses. Now, The Guardian today, the 26th of October 2021, has got a spread on pages 8 and 9. Now, 4 and 5 is based on the appearance before the MPs in the House of Commons by his Facebook ex-employee at Facebook, ex-employee, ex-Facebook employee, they say, Frances Hogan, who took with her thousands of internal Facebook documents. And the Guardian's take is what we have learned inside the cache of internal documents. And there are more details about what happened on the set of the Alec Baldwin film. some of the details are too upsetting and distressing. So we are not going to repeat the details, except to say that whatever the sequence of events that led to Helena Hutchins being shot and killed. The main issue is that lethal weapons were allowed on set. Which should be banned completely. The least of the kind of legacies of Helena Hutchins should be the banning of all lethal weapons from all film sets. Okay, in the Guardians, section called Journal head went off. The Journal is fronted by a piece by Polly Toynbee. And Polly Toynbee is probably the most widely known and longest running columnist at The Guardian. But inside, on page 4 of the opinion, there is a piece by the Conservative MP, David Davis. And his piece is headed, "Our right to challenge the state is in peril." Now, this is the same person who was appointed by Theresa May as the fanatic promoter of Brexit. He, of course, failed to deliver the kind of promised goodies for Brexit. Previous to becoming a front line kind of leadership contender, David Davis, as they say, made his mark as the chair of the Public Accounts Committee. I think David Davis preceded Margaret Hodge in the chair of the Public Accounts Committee. And it was during his incumbence as the chair of the Public Accounts Committee that David Davis appeared in many mainstream news as making comments that got him prominently promoted as a leading member of parliament. Now, this piece in today's Guardian, byline to David Davis, saying that our right to challenge the state is in peril, is at odds with the arguments that David Davis made for Brexit. Because the main pack of lies that Brexiteers embodied in the congenital liar Boris Johnson perpetrated was the lie that the European Union membership of the UK was actually damaging to the autonomy and sovereignty of the British state, by which they meant England, Little England. Now that is absolutely, demonstrably a pack of lies that David Davis was very fanatically, as a zealot, promoted. Remember, this is the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, and what we are doing is taking apart the lies in the Guardian, the lies by the Brexiteer David Davis. As I said before, Margaret Hodge took over as the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, which she is not chairing at the moment. It is being chaired by Meg Hillier, the Hackney constituency MP, one of the two. The other Hackney MP is, of course, Diane Abbott. Now, by the very definition of the Public Accounts Committee, its proceedings and deliberations are bound to be of a higher profile than the equivalents in other so-called select committees. So the Public Accounts Committee, which David Davis chaired before he became a leadership contender just 16 years ago, I think, or 17 years ago, against David Cameron, the sleazeball. So before that leadership ambitions, David Davis was in the mode that he's now reiterating 15 years later. And he's wrong to do that in terms of the kind of delay in asserting that our right to challenge the state is in peril, because he has been instrumental in giving credibility. He's not been the most instrumental factor or member of parliament in doing that, but he has been instrumental. And David Davis actually undermined that very right that he is now admitting. Our right to challenge the state is in peril. Because by the word state, what he is referring to is the executive. For example, what is called the government. Of course, The assumption is in this narrative, this analysis, this diagnosis, that this is dark age, that the congenital liar Boris Johnson is unfit for purpose at every level. So although he is on paper incumbent as the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson is the Minister of Darkness. And David Davis has woken up. David Davis has woken up far too late. He should have listened to the arguments of people who said that Brexit was wrong, because the sovereignty claim that the Brexiteers peddled was an intentional lie. Because what they were meaning by the attack on British sovereignty, the attack on the fascistic propensities and traditions in politics in Little England, and the shameless, brazen pursuit of fascistic lies by the congenital liar Boris Johnson. This was actually facilitated by Fleet Street, even by The Guardian. The Guardian didn't tell the truth about Brexit during the time when it was being promoted, vigorously promoted, including by the likes of David Davis. And The Guardian colluded with the completely corrupt myth created by the Brexiteering racists and liars, that Brexit was something that the Conservatives needed to have in order to address the issues within the Conservative Party. That was a monumental lie and a monumental betrayal and monumental disservice by The Guardian. Because The Guardian should not have had anything to do with whatever the Conservative internal agenda might be or might not have been. The Guardian should have talked about the country. The Guardian should have talked about the United Kingdom, and The Guardian didn't. The Guardian should have talked about the international treaties and conventions, agreements, declarations and obligations. The Guardian didn't. And no other organ did either, including The Observer, which is owned by The Guardian as a business. So none of the people who were expected reasonably, rationally, and objectively to warn the voters against the impact of Brexit did their job. They didn't do their job. So when David Davis now bemoans that our right to challenge the state is in peril, he is not being honest. He should have said that Brexit was wrong because the executive, Brexiteering executive, fronted by Boris Johnson, repeatedly lied about Parliament and Parliament's role. And he cancelled Parliament. He's the one that cancelled Parliament more than once. And even the Supreme Court, which actually ruled against the cancelling of the parliament didn't tell the whole truth. And the fact that the Supreme Court failed to tell the whole truth has meant and continues to mean that the lies, the packs of lies that Johnson and others, including David Davis, perpetrated in the name of Brexit, has remained unscrutinized. Because with the Labour Party being murdered, politically murdered, there has to be an agency, an arm of the part of the state that is independent of the executive. And the behavior of the Supreme Court is in failing to give the full reason, the truthful reason for saying no to Boris Johnson's banning of parliament, scrapping of parliament. And so the item in the Guardian by David Davis is actually an admission, but not expressly an admission. And what is happening with the propaganda is that the biggest constitutional, moral, ethical backwardness that has taken this country into the actual depth of darkness remains in place without being condemned for the wrongness that it has symbolized. And so therefore, what the Guardian is doing is lying, continuing to lie. And the rest of Fleet Street is continuing to lie. Because as the depraved DEFRA has been allowed to remain on the record as having lied against the most innocent baby angel Geronimo without being held to account, there is no chance that any part of the executive will be held to account. And nothing that David Davis says in The Guardian today actually makes any difference. As I said, although he made the right kind of beginning as a critic of executive, that is the state, abuses when he was faced with the evidence as chair of the Public Accounts Committee, David Davis abused that position and he allowed his ambition to become a leader in the Labour Party, in the Conservative Party, to lead him astray from that, which 15 years later he is now regretting. Because after gaining their prominence as the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, say 15 years ago, David Davis got it in his head that he could have a big head. That is to say, he could boast and be arrogant and be kind of careless about the obligations of the executive to be accountable to the country and to the people, to the electorate. So the higher his ambition, the further he became from the values that he correctly had recognized for accountability to which the executive should be held, obliged. So far did David Davis, the one-time champion of accountability for the executive, traveled, that now he's trying to rehabilitate himself, reinstate his image by the Guardian, not by the Daily Mail, Brexiteers, not by the daily bribing Boris Graf, or the Times even. He has gone to the Guardian, which is supposed to be not a conservative organ. But the Guardian is politically on deathbed. If it's not dead, it's politically on the deathbed. There is a piece about the European Union in the context of what is happening in Spain in the Financial Times. And there is a celebration in the Financial Times for Israel by Gideon Rahman, who is celebrating Israel's break out of its global isolation. So Fleet Street is a criminal collection of deniers and denials. The financial crimes is a financial crime because it is a kind of subterfuge. It's engaged in subterfuge and denial and secret propaganda. So the newspapers have got, as I said earlier, more details, which, because they're upsetting, I'm not repeating them or referring to them expressly, about the events that led to the death of Helena Hutchins. You could not imagine a more kind of unlikely victim of Hollywood than Helena Hutchins. By all accounts, she was a very bright individual and was already in receipt of various notices of acknowledgement of her talents and abilities. And by all the accounts, she was not an irresponsible individual, uncaring individual at all. So this is the reason why it is very upsetting to read anything about what happened to her. Because you don't expect a person of recognizable qualities and skills and talents and integrity to come to that kind of tragedy. Which is why I think that Hollywood should ban weapons. We shall be continuing the diagnosis of world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street in the next parts, whenever we are technically able to do the follow-up.